Hello, I am Maddie Dalrymple, the indie author, and welcome to Minding the Movies with TropeTalk, where we discuss what writers can learn from movie tropes. The live Minding the Movies events are open to patrons of the indie author and past podcast guests. And if you're watching this on replay and are not yet a patron and would like to join us, please head over to patreon.com/, the indie author, and that's indie with a Y, to explore membership options, which start at $1 per month. And my co-host for these events is the author of the TROPE THESAURUS series, Jennifer Hilt. Hey, Jennifer, how are you doing?
Oh, great. Glad to be here.
I'm always happy to have you here, always happy to talk about these movies and tropes with you. So, today we are going to be discussing The Green Knight, an epic fantasy adventure based on the Arthurian legend that tells the story of Sir Gawain, Patel, King Arthur's reckless and headstrong nephew, who embarks on a daring quest to confront the Green Knight, a gigantic emerald skinned stranger and tester of men. And so, we are going to be talking about the tropes of loner, scar, ticking time bomb, across the tracks, and journey. And as we discuss the movie, I'm going to ask Jennifer and all the listeners to consider two questions. What is something that you liked about the movie that you would consider modeling in your own work? And what is something you didn't like about the movie that you would avoid modeling in your own work? And just as a warning, we're assuming that viewers and listeners have seen the movie, so there are going to be spoilers included. And so, Jennifer, what do you think? Is there a trope that you would like to start out with, or any kind of background information? Because you pick these movies. So, what attracted you about The Green Knight?
Yes. Well, I'd always wanted to see it just because it looked kind of cool from the pictures when it came out. And then somehow it kind of got lost on my radar. And I personally just like stuff that feels really different. And from the pictures, it looked like kind of a different historical fantasy. And that everything was like dark and kind of dirty and stuff like that. And so I don't know, for some reason, I guess because I live in Seattle, I was attracted to that. But so I was interested in that. And then I had read about that it was based on the 14th century poem, but the director was also the writer and producer. The whole thing was basically the single man's vision. And that just really interested me as a storyteller because he had so much control over everything. So it's either gonna, the parts that work or don't work, it's still were his decisions. Where I think a lot of movies that we see now, particularly the ones that are super popular, are made by so many people and so many committees where they're doing like testing and things like that, and they end up reshooting the endings like all the time because the audience didn't like it and things like that. And I was just very interested in seeing a movie where probably none of that happened.
Yeah. Well, there's a nice analogy there to being an indie author, because if you're an indie author, then you have much more control over it than if you're writing for a publisher.
Mm,
And it was really apparent to me that there were, like, the one example, the pacing was quite different than I think it would have been if some big
yes.
movie studio
Back.
had gotten hold of it and decided that they wanted to make it kind of like I don't know,
Yeah.
the Marvel of the 14th century. But there was one point that I timed, because there's this scene where Sir Gawain is going out on his horse, on his quest,
Uh-huh.
and he's riding on his horse, and he's riding on his horse, and he's riding on his horse. And it went on for so long that I replayed it and then timed it, and it was over a minute, which
Oh,
over
really?
a minute doesn't sound like a long time, but in current movie
Right.
standards, it's
Yeah.
forever. So I like that, like you're saying, I think the vision that was on the screen is the vision that the director and the screenwriter had.
It's I didn't finish this other movie and it's kind of in comparison, but what I was talking about was there's recently a movie out with Chris Pine, who I really enjoy a lot of his stuff. And it's maybe it's Thieves of something, but it's like a kind of a medieval set movie. And it was exactly kind of what this is the opposite of this movie we just saw. And yeah, so if you're kind of like wondering for comparison to think about that, but yeah, that I know there's other stuff we wanted to talk about, but definitely pacing was one thing we should spend a little time with how he did stuff. I guess if we're just going to talk about trope wise, one thing that is, kind of front and center is that he definitely does the loner warrior trope. I mean, he's like literally a warrior, but yet he hasn't been tested really in battle, so he doesn't have a story or he doesn't have an identity to tell, and that's what this is about. And I thought it was interesting the whole part about his mother. I didn't realize mm, so she was the king's sister, so I didn't realize that she sent the Green Knight to him. I didn't until I had read that about it late afterward, because I was like, "Oh," like, I didn't understand what the her magic stuff had to do with that. So I just thought that was interesting, but in terms of her conjuring up a quest for him and, how that trope is just played out through the whole thing, and then there's a whole bunch of other tropes that work with it, but it's, like, unapologetically a warrior loner quest story. I mean, that's just, like, in the in the setup of it. So I thought that was just kind of, like, interesting to from the get-go.
Yeah, it was when I finished the movie earlier today. I thought, "Oh, I'm gonna be really curious to see to what extent the screenwriter, director complied with the story as it was written."
Mhm.
And I never got through the Wikipedia page is, like, 14 pages long because there are a million different interpretations of the
Right.
story, changes over time. There's, like, the Victorian, rendition of it and the much closer to the time it's supposed to be taking place of rendition to it. So I guess that was maybe was was good from this point of view that it gave the director, and I should find out what his name is so I don't just keep saying the director.
Right, because I don't remember. Yeah, I think it was what, I think it was a smart idea for storytelling and really points to the use of tropes in terms of I don't think I personally was not familiar with that story. I knew, you know, Sir Gawain, the Knights of the Round Table, vaguely knew what that thing was just from popular culture and just kind of general. But it's such a great example of how you use tropes to do that. So you're not going into it blind. It's not like you don't have any idea what this movie is going to be about. But then he like took those elements and put them in this very particular fantasy world that, was really very quirky and hard to imagine like another person could come. There was nothing generic about it, I guess is what I
Right.
thought.
David Lowery. David
Did
Lowery is the director, writer, editor, and producer of The Green Knight.
yeah.
And there were some parts that, in a way, it was just sort of a long series of vignettes based, I'm assuming, on, there's some story about Sir Gawain running into a fox. So, the fox shows up. And now there's the one where he runs into, the Lord and
Yeah, he
the,
gets robbed.
the Lord's wife seduces him or whatever. And that was all in there. But it would be I would imagine that he would well, obviously, he had complete control over how he fit all those parts in, what he included, what he didn't include, and other than just making a movie that was incredibly gorgeous to look at, when it was visible, which I have some comments about, it it was it was kind of hard as especially as someone who really is an outliner, a plot outliner as an author, it was hard for me to understand why he was making the decisions he was making.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Is
think there was definitely, it definitely had this meandering feel to it, and yeah. Yeah, it wasn't when we talk about well, I guess maybe a way to help talk about that would be like the ticking time bomb trope and how okay, so there was a good ticking time bomb trope set up in that, okay, it's Christmas, next Christmas, you do this thing now, you get this whole year, and then next Christmas you have to, receive the return the favor, so to speak.
right.
So that was like really good because I think especially with this director, if he didn't have that, can you imagine how long this thing could have gone on? It could have been like do they did, 6 parts or something like that, and he just went on and on. So I think that was really good or I really appreciated knowing, okay, right off the bat, there's this time element of it. But then the execution of it was like, oh, curious, to say the least of how he did that. But I think that's just like something that I'm appreciating more and more in stories and that there's almost or at least stories that I really am enjoying, that very early on in the story, there's some indication that there's a significant time element that's going to happen in this story. So there isn't forever and a day to resolve the issue, and that really presents so much great conflict, and really as a viewer helps me get on board for okay, how is this going to lean forward into how is this going to result. So that was one thing that I really liked about how he used the ticking time bomb was like right away we were going to know what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I also another trope that I can't think of other examples, but I know it's a trope, is that whole the moment before your death and, your whole life that you might have led flashes
Oh,
before your
yes,
eyes.
yeah.
Can you
That I think I really believe that dreams and flashbacks and backstory, like those things are all a form of the time travel trope because It is time travel, it's just not with spaceships and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, I that at least that's my view of a way to use it.
Yeah. One of my favorite this is a little bit different, but whenever I had the opportunity, I like to mention it that one of my favorite series was 6 Feet Under.
Oh,
And in the last spoiler alert, in the
uh-huh,
last episode of that series, the all the characters who all were in one way or another associated with a funeral home.
right.
It was
Yeah.
the family funeral home. And they showed them all dying.
Oh,
And it was kind of yeah, I thought it was very clever because I think that people became very attached to the characters and to be able to see what their life became. And,
mhm,
some of the characters died shortly after. Well,
ye
one of the main characters died. It's kind of like the climactic thing at the end of the series. But um, then being able to see how everybody else died, some of the characters were old, some of the characters were relatively young, some of the characters just died in bed, some of the characters were like shot in a holdup. And I thought it was a super clever way of providing a sense of closure to the viewers, and also, even at that very, very last moment, showing giving insight into the characters
mhm,
that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So,
yeah,
certainly the fact that, Gawain evidently plays out his whole life as it would have been if he ran away, and that's what it was, is, you have these moments of nothing seems to be happening for a long time, and then you have this ending part where it's like, "Oh my god, everything's happening in the last 5 minutes,"
right.
which was an interesting and I thought effective trope to use in this circumstance.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's a great I love that series, 60 I mean, the I think lately I've been thinking a lot about kind of why some characters are more appealing to me as a viewer slash reader writer, and I just realized I love deeply flawed people, and when that's just like how that's just so much more interesting to me, and I think that series was just a great job of there wasn't anybody in there who was kind of like I thought like a flat stereotypical character that I could at least that
Yeah,
I can think of right now. They all just when you thought you understood them, they would turn it just a little bit and there would be like this other layer,
yeah.
and that was just yeah, that was really, really cool. One thing that I thought one thing that bothered me a lot about this movie, and I don't know, but I was really bothered by the Gawain's how he treated Essel the prostitute. And I think it was very in character what would have been at the time, but I just was like, "Oh, wow." I think I really liked Dwayne up until that time. And, even though, I could kinda deal with his worries and all this kind of stuff but it was like, oh, and when he got power that then the choices that he made was, like, revealing this other aspect of character. And I was like, "Oh, why did he do that? Why couldn't he just, whatever?" He was the king, he could have done whatever, he could have married Essie or whatever. But it
But did
just
he really do it, or did he just think that he might do it?
I know, yeah. So I think once I'd been given a taste of what he could be, I didn't feel the same about the character,
Mhm.
which is, a great way of doing it for the storyteller. But yeah, I mean, yeah, then when you're like, "Oh, that didn't happen," "Oh, this can, take it back," but there's still the lingering fragment. But I just had noticed that my thought about that character had changed as a result of seeing that.
Yeah. Well, and it does sort of muddy the waters in other ways, and that, I guess there's the whole classic JR, what was that
Oh, to
series? Dynasty or
oh, oh,
whatever
oh,
that was, where
Dallas, yeah.
Dallas, it was all a dream,
Yeah,
which is kind of the same here, like, you see all this stuff happening to him, and
right,
it's, "Oh, never mind, it was just his imagination," which is
right.
I bought it here.
Yeah.
Did you buy it? Were you bothered by just the mechanism of that, "I'm seeing my future life flashing before my eyes," or did you find that annoying?
No, I I think I really bought into it, which is why I felt so kind of changed about his character that he
Yeah,
had that potential. I didn't I don't remember when I watched it at the time thinking, "Oh, this is just a dream and whatever." No, I really thought that was his kind of destiny and that he was I felt like I was experiencing it as much as that character. So then when it was like, "Nope, that's not the case. That's not gonna happen," then it's, "Oh, you're still processing that," and it's just like you've woken up again from the dream idea.
yeah.
But I think it was very well done in a way to show that, but I just was, like, real recognizing that I it made me feel very differently about a character who I've been pretty sympathetic to up
Yeah.
until that time.
Yeah, and I think that I got a little bit caught up in, when it wasn't apparent that it was his imagination and he runs away from the Green Knight and he goes back to the city and he goes to the king and the king. So I thought, okay, well, it's apparent that he didn't hang around to get his, just desserts or whatever. And so now he's showing up. What story has he told?
Right.
Because I don't think that the king would be basically turning his kingdom over to Gawain if he realized that he had just run away from this assignment of honor. So
Right,
the fact that I got caught up in, wait, what was the story he told
right,
was was distracting to me.
right. So, and I yes, I agree, and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, so I guess it was he told them a story, they believed it, he, inherited the crown, and then after time, people saw that he was actually that was really untrue, who he presented himself to be. Was that what you thought?
Well, I couldn't see any way that people would believe that he had vanquished the Green Knight without some evidence. I didn't see, coming back with his head or whatever.
Right.
That I just wasn't buying the whole thing. And I thought that people turned on him because of the way he treated the woman,
Mm.
like when he comes through the gate and they throw rotten fruit at him and then
Yeah,
she's standing
right,
there. But then that didn't make sense to me. I mean, I think I was bringing a much more literal interpretation of it than I should have, but I thought, it's been, 20 years and now they're throwing fruit at him. I don't
right.
know. As a
I
very literal-minded person, I got hung up on that.
Yeah, no, I wasn't sure either, and I guess I thought they were just kind of showing, oh, he had his star had kind of fallen or something. He'd fallen out of favor with people and he couldn't kind of back it up or whatever. But yeah, again, it wasn't super clear,
Well,
but
let's take a look at some of the other tropes. So,
yeah.
you had identified the tropes of loner.
Yep.
I think that that's pretty straightforward,
Yeah.
but what are you seeing that is indicative of a loner trope in The Green Knight?
Well, I mean, loner and warrior almost always go together in a lot of ways. I think it's really hard to have a warrior who's not a loner, but you don't necessarily have to have a loner who's a warrior. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think just that he was kind of outside the court enough that he was in the court, but he wasn't really a member of the round table. He didn't have a thing he'd done that could identify himself. That was the reason for this whole quest. So, and then just I think showing him, of course, doing the thing on the quest on his own. But then I liked how they showed even when he became king, when you at least I would in my mind would have thought, "Oh, he's kind of made it." He still seemed very alone. And so it was interesting that trope kind of followed all the way through and that he didn't have really much growth in that regard, as a
Yeah.
character, even though the warrior part obviously had changed. So that was, one that's pretty straightforward, but I liked how it was done. What other I talked about I said forced proximity, right?
The tropes that you had identified were
Yeah.
loner, scar, ticking time bomb, which we talked about, across the tracks and journey.
Okay. So I guess the across the tracks one was what I was thinking of with Essie, with the prostitute and how that really surprised me in the beginning of the movie that is the king's, nephew or whatever. But there was so much fluidity in how that relationship was. But yet, in the end, when he had his visions and stuff like that, he had to choose. He married somebody of his own class. But that was just kind of like in where she says, "Oh, are you going to make me your lady?" and things like that. So that was kind of my interpretation of the across the tracks one.
And how
But
about scar?
oh, Scar, yes. Well, Scar I really like because it can either be like emotional or physical. And a lot of times I think we see it as physical to kind of trigger that in Harry Potter is the most common example, one that I think that everybody knows. But I think in this one, his scar was really in the beginning that he didn't have a quest and he needed to prove himself and he needed to kind of have his story. And that was really the motivation for him going on the whole thing. And then I also dislike the whole idea of, losing your head and, that kind of aspect of it. They never said anything about what happened to his, like, father or anything like that. So, that was kind of what I was expecting, that we would learn more about what that situation was. But I would say with him, his scar was really just, like, part of his identity and his motivation for going on that quest.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah, it
was
was I mean, it was an interesting combination of the way I think most modern people think about, a round table scenario, knight's honor and so on, that it was kind of, I guess, believable that he would say, "Well, I said I was gonna go let the let the Green Knight take his whack at me, so I have to," and then changing his mind at the last moment, but
yes,
it
very
was a different then he had a different kind of scar, I guess.
yes, yeah, right. And I think, it was a very good, like, kind of the imperviousness of youth of, "Oh, well, yeah, this is, like, the way to do it, and nothing that won't happen to me, I'll figure it out, something will come up," kind of thing. And then the reality of that coming on. And then I think also his scar was in the dream sequence when he ran away. That really became the scar for, like, how things deteriorated after that. And
And
his
there was
son
that scene where his mother is bathing his back,
Oh,
he's
right,
returned.
yeah. Yes, he had physical scars.
Yeah, and I couldn't really tell if it was intended to be because the whole movie was so damn murky. I couldn't tell if it
Mhm.
was just supposed to be like the trials and tribulations of life on the road, or if he had been, whipping himself or something like that, punishing himself in some way,
Right,
but I couldn't really tell.
right. Yes, I forgot about that, but yeah. I just love that it always seems like when there's the warrior, there is some scene where you see the physical scars, and I had
Yeah,
forgotten about that in that, but that's so funny because
yeah.
even in this movie, which was, I think, not very standard, although as
Yeah.
we talk about it, we can see how he used a lot of standard tropes. It's, "Oh, yeah, there it is."
Yeah, I realized that I I was watching it kind of in a weird 2 weird ways. One is that I just got back from vacation, so I was trying to do a whole bunch of stuff, and
Mhm.
I had slotted in watching this movie at a certain time, and then that time got used up with something else, so I was
Yeah.
in this sort of frantic, "I've gotta
Oh,
watch this movie,"
right.
and every once in a while, when he was just riding his horse for a
Yeah.
minute, I'd be
Right,
like, "Okay, 10 seconds, 10 seconds,
right,
10
yeah,
seconds,"
yeah.
and I regretted doing that. Like, I do feel like I would wanna go back and just sit down and watch it when I'm not being distracted.
Mhm.
Um, I was thinking it would probably be helpful to have a lot of wine or possibly smoke
Yeah.
pot before you watch it because, you get, like, something else out of it. It was lovely to look at, but
Mhm.
it was you had to be in a certain frame of mind to do it because the pacing was so different than I think
Yes.
what people are used to getting in movies these days.
I think what drew me to it was I felt like when I saw the previews for it, oh, it was I used to really love the old indie art house movies, and it's so changed in Seattle. They literally have gotten rid of those places, and now we have a different, you can get them through Sundance Film Channel and things like that. There's other ways that we can get those things, but it's different. It's a different experience of it. I would have really enjoyed seeing that on a really big screen, sitting in the dark. And,
Yeah, yeah.
I might have drifted off or something here or there, but it would just felt like I was in that world more than opposed to, watching it in our den with my husband and snacks and cats and stuff like that,
Right.
which
Yeah.
was a little more distracting, but
Well, I
yeah.
think that I brought up the murkiness a couple of times, so
Yeah.
I'll address that, that I had my, monitor turned up as bright as could possibly be, and there were long, long stretches where I had no idea what was going on, and I thought that that was I did not like that,
Yeah.
and I think that the analogy for a writer would be there are some things you just don't wanna leave to the viewer or the reader's imagination, like, sometimes you have to be a little more obvious, and
Mhm.
if there were minutes at a time where I was looking, I was like, He appears to be walking through a building, but I have no idea what's going on." That just got frustrating,
Mhm.
and
Right.
I think that seems to be I've read a couple of articles recently where I think that's a trend, just having it be very, very dark is a trend, and the other thing I've heard people complain about is the fact that audio tends to be harder to hear.
Right.
So there were times when I feel like such an old person,
Yeah.
turning on the captions so I could tell what was going on. So I think that we were saying one of the things we wanna do is talk about what's the lesson we learned that we'd wanna carry forward and what would
Right.
we not wanna carry forward, and one of the things I would not wanna carry forward is having the textual equivalent of that murkiness that was in the movie, and it especially highlighted for me when you could see what was going on, and it was so beautiful and atmospheric and setting the stage. And I was like, why couldn't they have made it all like a little bit more visible? What were your thoughts about how it was filmed?
Is he European? I didn't actually look that up. It had a very, because I as somebody who loves all those dark Scandinavian ones, they usually are, like, literally darker.
Yeah.
The lighting is, and so I kind of just, probably that was one of the things that attracted to me, because I was, "Ooh, it's not Hollywood lighting, so I'm probably gonna like it." But yeah, I think I think you need to, like, I think at that point speaks to, like, the genre expectations. So, like, for us, we're doing this, you know, it's not a big deal. But if you're writing for a genre that doesn't do things like that are gonna confuse or, frustrate your reader, then not to do it. Because the last thing we wanna do is have somebody put the book down or be like, "I don't understand what's happening," you know, kind of
Yeah.
thing. We wanna tease people to, like, "Oh, what's gonna happen next?" But you wanna feel like you're in the game enough so that you can anticipate some things. You might not be right, hopefully you aren't. You'll get surprised, but yeah, you shouldn't be, like, totally lost or worse, bored, you know? So, I think, like, when we're talking about I thought that pacing issue was, for me, some of the darkness was also a plotting pacing issue, and I'm sure I'm in a minority on this, but I absolutely could not stand the Lord of the Rings movies, because I felt like it was just everything was, like, gearing up for another battle, and then they go to battle, and they come back, and they gear up for another battle, and I watched it with my husband, who, like, loved that series, and it was just so interesting to have a totally different direction, and I would be like, "Wait, was this just, like, another battle? I don't even know, like, what," like, I had no connection, or I felt very at sea in the movie,
Yeah.
and it's just kinda like, I'm not the reader for that series, I think,
Yeah.
and so it's, like, good to be aware of what your audiences are expecting, so that you can keep them in your story.
Yeah. It is interesting to look back and think that considering this is like about knights going out on a quest, there really wasn't a lot of action.
Right, and he
There's a
didn't.
lot of just walking through the lovely heather covered
Right,
hills and
right, and the people he came up against were, like, it was interesting, because he, like, well, there was of course, he kept meeting the fox, then there was, like, the people who robbed him, and then there was, like, the woman who said, "You need to retrieve my head," or something, like, but it was like, yeah, he wasn't going into battle,
right.
which was interesting, because that was an expectation I had, was that, oh, there was gonna be some battle stuff in this movie, and I was just gonna have to suck it up,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, the retrieving the head for the woman was one of those ones where I got to the end of it and I thought, "Well, that was really interesting." I'm not quite sure it was
Perhaps.
like, my guess is it was just a super cool part of the legend that David Lowery wanted to make sure he included. And I was okay with that. And the
Yeah.
other thing I realized in terms of expectation setting is that I think I would have set myself up better for fully appreciating this if I had known that it was 2 plus hours.
Mhm.
Like, if I paid attention to how long it was, I would have budgeted my time and my attention appropriately, and I
Right.
realized that an author learning I don't know what we can do about it, but one of the things that I think is interesting an interesting difference in, uh, print books versus ebooks is that even though you had that little you can bring up the thing that says how what percentage you're through an ebook, you don't really have that visceral sense of, "Oh, I'm coming to the end." And I know a couple of times I've been reading ebooks and I'm like, "I feel like I might be coming to an end. I better check the percentage thing so I'm setting my expectation appropriately." And just then you allow the reader or the viewer to pace themselves because
Mhm.
they know how much more is coming as opposed
Right,
to, "Oh, we're almost at the end. We're almost going to
right,
see the big climactic scene."
right. Yeah, I think there was a very long middle in this movie that was, gratuitous with parts of it, and it was, whether, yeah, you really were like, "Oh, the scenery is pretty," or, "Oh, let's fast forward through all this," Some, we
Yeah.
don't need quite this much of it, but yeah. What other
Well,
ones? Yeah, I was gonna say.
the other thing this I'm gonna first of all, I had to share this quote that was from New York Times review. And actually, this turned out to be, I think, a pretty positive review, but it doesn't sound like it based on the sentence. But the most sincere compliment I can pay the Green Knight is that it often feels like a tribute to the seventh seal by way of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, or maybe vice versa, with some Led Zeppelin deep cuts thrown in.
Oh, that's good. But, honestly, I really like that review, because It kinda talks about what we wanna do with tropes, where that we're taking the ideas and we're making them our own and so incredibly specific. So he's taken things that shouldn't we normally wouldn't think belong together and made that his very specific vision.
Yeah.
That's a good quote. I hadn't looked it up to see how it had done or anything like that. I think it was still in the pandemic when it came out because it seemed like I saw the thing about it, but then it was gone and then every once in a while I was like, "Oh yeah, I wanted to watch that." I'd see it like pop up. So, I was glad we had this to okay, make myself put it, you know, to actually watch this. And then and a good one to talk about because there's so much stuff going on with it.
Well, the part that did make me think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and I did not this, is when they would have I can't remember what they're called, but, the text would pop up like, "The interlude," or "A
Oh,
beheading occurs."
yeah.
And every time that happened, I was like, it really did look Monty Python-esque. Like, it almost I would I can imagine being in a theater and having everybody laugh when that happens,
Right.
which I don't think is probably the effect he was going for, but it was very
Mhm.
jarring.
Mhm.
And I think the analogy for me for writing is when when the creator is interjecting themselves so explicitly into the story, I find it very distracting
Yeah.
and I don't like that. What were your thoughts about those titles that would pop up?
I think yeah, I think it was really going for that Monty Python kind of absurd.
Oh, really?
I think yeah, I think he probably did that very deliberately. And it's funny because, again, I'm not the audience for Monty Python, and I've seen it because, again, my husband is. And it's funny because it's just I've seen his stuff several times and in several different phases of my life, and it still doesn't work for me. And so I think it's just there's a specific, like the authorial voice or whatever. And it's, you're either on board with it or not, like you're saying. And
Yeah.
those ones are just a little bit too much for me in terms of the injection of yeah, the external element, I guess. You
I'm
look
a
at
Monty Python fan, but I still found it
uh-huh.
like someone had a pratfall right in the middle of
Right.
like something that otherwise seemed sort of ethereal and,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
legendary.
My guess is if that was a movie that was being made that you didn't have complete control over, it would not have stayed.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I think
Well, I
he
was gonna say one thing that I did, and this is I'm gonna sound like I'm contradicting myself a little bit by saying this, but there was a part at the beginning where ostensibly it's a scene of a farmyard where a duck and a goat are having a little spat.
Hmm.
And I was watching it, and it was one of those ones that went out way longer than you would expect, and then I realized that in the corner of the screen, there was a house that was catching fire. Did
I
did you
noticed
notice that?
I didn't. I don't think I did.
It was so weird. There was like, the very dark
Right. Yeah.
scene of the barnyard with the horse and the I mean, the goat and the goose having a spat, and then I realized that there was like, over the stone wall
Right.
of the farmyard in the
Right.
distance, there was a building, and I finally noticed that it was like, the roof was burning, and I was like,
Oh,
"What happened there?" So
yeah.
I rewound it, and uh, you could see a light in the window, like,
Yeah.
flickering, there's flames, and then the film kind of it did something that indicated that some time had gone by. And then
Yeah.
you could actually see flames in the window. And then a little more time, then were like some flames coming out the window, and the fire got bigger and bigger. And then there was a scene where it was one of these steady cam things where it went
Right.
on, and the camera kind of went through the door,
Mhm.
and then Sir Gawain showed up, and I thought, okay, well, he's gonna go, I don't know, rescue someone from the fire. The fire, as far as I could tell, never showed up again. But it was so weird because I was watching, yeah, yeah, okay,
Right.
you know, the goat and the goose.
Yeah.
But wait, and I have to say I got a huge kick out of that because it was like seeing a little Easter egg. I
Right.
thought it would
Right.
have been easy for me to skip it. I was like, "Oh, no, look, there's fire going on in the background."
I
I don't
had
know why that would be I would react differently to that than some of the other bizarro things that went on, but
it's that's a neat example though of world building and like the vignettes of it. I guess also of like subtext and text, which is I think what you like about Monty Python because it seems like
uh
that's always kind of the
yeah.
case with everything. So that that was really interesting. I had forgotten about that.
So how about you? What were things that you saw in this movie? Let's start out with something you didn't like. What was something you saw in the movie that you didn't like that you would want to avoid in your work?
I think the pacing part that we mentioned was really something that, like, it that I was like, "Okay, I really do need to pay attention to that," because it can, even if you're enjoying something, if it goes on too long, it can be a turn off.
Yeah.
And, it's "Oh, I could pause it and, do something else," and then in reality, you don't get back to it. So I
Yeah.
think the really just a reminder of, how tight pacing is your friend as a storyteller. And the thing that I loved about it was I just loved that atmospheric feeling of the costumes and the time and just the settings, and I just love the differentness of it. It just I really enjoyed that. It's kind of like a pace from, kind of regular life, and like I said, we had tried to watch the Chris Pine, Thieves movie, around, like, I think after that, because I was like, "Oh," and it was just kinda like it probably wasn't a bad movie, but I was so, like, wanting a similar kind of experience, and it was very brightly lit, and, everybody's very, like, even if they're kind of grubby looking, they all have very white teeth, and it's just kinda like I find that super distracting, and this so I really liked the consistency of the world, I guess, would be my way of saying, "Oh, that's a really good thing to keep in mind, to be consistent with your world and really deliver that experience to your audience."
Yeah, I think the one thing that I found distracting, maybe in a good way, I don't know, but Dev Patel's hair, there were times when he looked grubby and sweaty and looked like he needed to take a shower and so on. But every once in a while he would show up and his hair was clearly more fashionable looking.
Mhm.
Well, it's like, whoa, he looks like he's in a shampoo ad. He does have lovely hair.
He
Um,
has lovely hair, yes,
yes.
yes, yes. And I know, it was funny because I was watching, like, "Oh, yeah, he's really attractive," and all this kind of stuff, and it's so funny. Oh, and I was, like, thinking how much, "Oh, I love the earthiness of it," and I was like, "Oh, in reality, he would smell really bad."
Yeah.
But
Well, it
yep.
was interesting because I think that there was like I had several people say, "Oh, I wasn't gonna watch it until I saw that Dev Patel was in it. Now I've got to watch it."
Yeah, yes, we were talking
Um,
about that last time, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Hey.
and I I feel like and I'm stretching a little bit to find a way to apply this to the author the author world, but I can imagine if someone did a timing of how much time was just the camera on Dev Patel's face
Yeah,
for minutes at a time,
yeah,
and then imagining someone else in it, I really couldn't imagine many other actors who could have held the attention in that way, even when he wasn't really doing anything,
yeah,
and also conveying a lot of emotion without a lot of over
dialogue.
mugging or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, did you have any thoughts about just his portrayal of the character and how
I
that worked or didn't work?
Yeah, I agree. I hadn't really seen him in a lot of stuff, and I hadn't seen him in this kind of anything like this before. But I was really struck when I was watching it of, like, yes, he's obviously a very physically attractive person, but I was really impressed with, because there isn't a ton of dialogue in this movie. I thought that the way he was really able to convey emotions crossing his face, that was just like, oh yeah, that's the actor's job, you know?
Yeah.
And I was, more appreciative of that than a lot of times when I see movies and I get caught up in the snappy dialogue or the action or something like that. And I think this was that kind of movie where, because of the pacing, you got more of that, of
Y
where it was just the actor.
yeah, the pacing of the dialogue, as I think you're suggesting, even that seemed not modern,
Mhm,
because there were lots of scenes where a character would ask Gawain a question, and there was, like, a much longer beat before he would
mhm.
respond.
Right.
Which felt right, but I thought it was handled very well. I really liked that, and I guess the learning there for writing is that if you can find a way to convey the speed of the conversation, I can imagine doing that with dashes indicating people are interrupting each other, something like that, but just conveying if someone's taking a beat or 2 beats or 3 beats, that says a lot. Like, he was never jumping into a conversation. He was always hearing something, and then you could tell he was, like, thinking, and then he would respond to it, which is not what you're used to seeing in
Ex-
modern movies with modern settings.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think also with writing of, showing, thinking about maybe there's like a mannerism or something physical that the character does that we can tell the reader if so that's not, doesn't everything have to be in speech
Yeah.
or yeah.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see the screenplay of that, like the actual,
Yeah.
the thing that's showing the dialogue, because there was very little dialogue. It
Right.
would say, then Gawain rides on his horse for 1 minute.
Right. Yeah. Or the scene, I thought it was really well done. And I was realizing how tense it was making me where he was tied up and he was trying to get to his, um, get to the sword. And I was like, "Oh," I was very conscious of they literally tied him up and left him there, and it went on for a length of time that I wasn't used to in visual storytelling,
Yeah,
because it's usually, okay, he's tied up and boom, he's, done some clever thing and he's out. And like his struggles were the way he did the struggles thing was like, "Oh, I," that was one of those scenes where I was like, "Oh, he's actually like acting." And so that was just an interesting I was impressed with the director and actor to realize to fill that space, you know?
well,
And
and the fact that he did it, you can imagine if it was James Bond, then he would have found a way to get from where he was to where the axe was in a very sort of graceful and elegant looking way, whereas in this, no, he was just kind of flopping around like a fish out of water, because that's how you do it.
right, that was yeah. Yeah, I really felt like I could feel his frustration and really was like, "Oh, yeah, what if you really couldn't get out of the ropes?" Where a lot of times in an action setting like that, it's just almost like a transit thing to something bigger, to going after the bad
Right.
guy. So,
Yeah, yeah, they did a good job of not minimizing, if one were to put oneself in that
yeah.
circumstance.
Yeah,
You're right, it wouldn't just be a build up to something bigger.
right.
They reflected the trauma of that moment
Yeah, I think that's
itself.
kind of an interesting thing to think about as authors of really stepping into almost all the potential conflicts that are in your stories to expand them
Mhm.
to get the most out of it. It's also something I've just kind of been thinking of, but just kind of like, oh, yeah, like we're saying, they could have moved that along a lot faster and missed a lot of conflict. And
Right.
it's kind of like, oh, okay, sometimes it's all right to slow down and so show something when you really have things at stake and
Yeah,
have a point. So it's kind of interesting.
yeah, and thinking through, I don't have an answer for this, but, when one encounters a scene like that in a movie, thinking through how that could be translated into text,
Mhm.
that you feel that the kind of visceral sympathy with the person who's in the circumstance that you're reading about or seeing.
Yeah.
Any other lessons you would like to call out from this or that you'd carry forward?
I don't think so. Only that this, and it's just a strange. I was very. I remember being very impressed by his girdle, the green girdle thingy, and I was just like, I don't know if it was the color or something, but it seemed like for things that were very muted, the thing that his mom gave him for around to wear, for protection. I was like noticing that it was more noticeable to me, I guess, or something. It was just kind of interesting that even later I was thinking about that as an element. So I don't know. This kind of interesting the things that stick with you with a story that I don't know if it was supposed to in that way or that was just kind of how my mind is working. But just you just kind of never know what an audience or storyteller is going to hook. Somebody's going to hook onto that will leave them wondering afterward.
So you're saying the actual color of the
Yeah, the
sash, or
color and just and then remember the mother was like, "Oh, don't ever take it off," but then he ended up losing it,
right?
right? Yeah. But the physical I just thought how it was made was very interesting to me, and then it as an object was, like, something that I thought about later, so, I don't know, I was just kind of
Yeah,
think it was just kind of surprising to me that that was, like, what stuck with me,
yeah.
you
Well,
know?
I had maybe a similar reaction to the inexplicable blind woman in the castle, and she had a blindfold on, but it was like a towel wrapped around her head, and then it had, like, rows of twine or something holding it in
Yeah,
place, and every
yeah,
time she would turn around, I'm, like,
right,
looking at it to try to figure out, like, how they did that and why they picked that way to portray her blindfold.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know, I
Yeah.
guess it's just those little kind of things that make it his movie. I don't know if he's done other stuff or anything like that, but I would be curious just because to see what other things his storytelling vision is very his own.
Yeah, we can have the David Lowery
Yes. Yeah.
cinema series.
Yes.
Well, so much fun. I'm going to give a little teaser for our next event, which is on Sunday, March 17th,
Mhm.
2024 at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. And we should have been doing the Green Night then because it's St. Patrick's Day.
Yes,
That would have
that's
been fun.
that's
But in actuality, we're going to be discussing The Lobster, a 2015 absurdist black comedy drama film directed and co-produced by Yorgos
I don't know how to
Lanthimos,
yeah, I'm not sure.
starring Colin Farrell, Rachel Weisz, Jessica Barton, and Olivia Colman, among many others. And the film follows a newly single bachelor who moves into a hotel with other singletons who are all obliged to find a romantic partner in 45 days or else be transformed into animals.
You know yet, Maddie?
I have not, no.
Yes, I loved it. And this director, I saw it a while ago, but I hadn't realized that the director, whose name I can't say, the Greek man, he's the one who's done Poor Things, the one that's out now. He's done this one, and then he also did The Favorite. I don't know if you saw that one. That's
Not, no.
another historical. That's a historical one, and I hadn't realized that they were, or I hadn't connected those dots till recently. But he's another one who I think it'll be super fun to talk about because he has
Well,
a specific storytelling view, and there's gonna be lots of cool things.
yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It reminded me a little, not knowing anything about it, but reading just the description, I thought it would be a fun follow on to The Royal Tenenbaums. Is
Oh,
it
yeah.
sounds like it might have a kind of similar
Yeah.
tone.
I had never thought about it, but yeah, you're right. And Colin Farrell, isn't he Irish? So I think we're in good stand
Yes,
with
that's right, that's right. We're making a little nod that way
yes.
to St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, perfect. So, the live events are open to patrons of the indie author and past podcast guests. And if you're a patron, the Zoom link is included in your weekly Patreon email newsletter. And if you're not a patron already, please consider signing on at patreon.com/the indie author. And that's indie with a Y. So, Jennifer, as always, super fun to talk with you. I appreciate you sharing your trope expertise
Oh,
and also providing the movie ideas. I've loved all the movies you've picked.
oh, good. I they're very, idiosyncratic, so
Yes. Well, that
it's
makes it
really
more fun.
interesting it's so much more interesting to talk about it with somebody. I learned so much more about it, that things I didn't see when I just watch it myself, so.
Yeah. Well, we were saying before we started recording that I really don't, despite the fact that I'm an author and I hang out with a lot of authors, I just don't have that many opportunities to sit around and really dissect something in detail the way we do here. So I'm having a lot of fun. I'm hoping the viewers and listeners are also having a lot of fun hearing your insights about the tropes.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun. So, yeah, so be sure to watch The Lobster and join us next time. It's a little more accessible than what we just watched, but it's good.
Perfect. Thank you.